Good evening. You're on the smoking section with Steve Helfer and David Ajemian, my once a month collaborator. David, thanks for coming on
Hi,
tonight.
Steve. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you. And I was glad that we were greeted by a smokers' rights enthusiast outside who gave us a pie. That was
It was
nice.
very nice. Yeah.
He must watch the show occasionally, although I don't recognize him per se. And I just saw a couple of things that passed my mind about tobacco in general. Are you familiar with the movie The Big Sleep? Have you seen that?
With Humphrey Bogart.
Yeah, I think he's in it. Definitely, yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
doesn't he speak?
I've seen it. Yeah, I have seen it, but I don't know it well.
Well, I was just watching a remake on it on television the other night, and it was interesting because it's a remake with a lot of big names: Jimmy Stewart and Robert Mitchum. In fact, Robert Mitchum plays the role that Humphrey Bogart played.
Oh, so this was a remake. I mean, a while back.
Yeah, it was very funny because
Oh.
it wasn't a recent remake. It had to be. I don't know when Robert Mitchum died or when Jimmy Stewart died, but they certainly haven't been alive for 20 years, right?
No, I mean, but I can't remember the play. That's one of those Philip Marlowe film noirs. Big
It's a
Sleep.
film noir.
I can't remember who the
Chandler, Raymond Chandler.
Raymond Chandler. Yeah.
And the funny thing about the movie is I remember seeing it at the Brattle a long time ago because it's a very famous film noir. And it's completely incomprehensible. What the whole plot is just so confusing. And I remember reading about it, and evidently everyone else felt the same way. But there's one scene where the hard-boiled private detective is being employed by this very wealthy man who is kind of an invalid. And the private detective says to the invalid, "Do you mind if I smoke?" And the invalid says, "Oh, please do smoke, and please wave a little of the smoke my way, because my doctor has forbidden me from smoking, so I enjoy the secondhand smoke, as it were."
Okay.
You don't remember that scene?
No. But it's funny because I'd seen a cartoon recently where they not a cartoon, it was a photograph from the 1950s in which a nurse was offering cigarettes to a patient in a hospital. I mean, they were selling cigarettes.
Right.
To which was it was kind of a surprising photo.
Well, that reminds me because now that it reminds me because I was just down at Massachusetts General Hospital, and they have a museum down there. I think it's called the Russell Museum, and I was in there, and they had some photos from World War One. And there's a photo of a lot of World War One veterans in a hospital ward, and they're all smoking.
Hmm.
Why are you shaking your head?
Well, because I'm just thinking that there was that terrible influenza, that
1918.
that people were very sensitive about issues with the lungs. I would think, It just shows
I
you.
don't know. I mean, I think. Well, I don't know what year this was. This was actually a field hospital in France,
In France. Okay.
and I want to get this photo because it's a great photo, and maybe I'll have the photo. I'm thinking about changing my backdrop here from the Rat Pack to a photo like that. It's a really wonderful photo, so I'm glad you. I'm glad. I mean, I mean, hospitals up until certainly, I would say 1980, would provide areas for their patients to smoke. I would say up into the 1980, after 1980, I would say into the 80s. That's when I think the anti-smoking movement really, in my lifetime, took off, as it were.
And certainly in psychiatric hospitals, I think that might have even lasted longer.
I would think so.
Because even into maybe the 90s or the early 2000s, I think that was because I think they might have made special allowances for mental health
But
patients.
they may have, but I know that into the 80s, and it's just people looked very happy being able to smoke and relax in the hospitals. I think a lot more uptight now. And of course, as I mention always on this show, we've cut down the rate of smoking 50% in the last, I don't know, 30 years or so. And it seems like the hospitals are filled with non-smokers. It's not as if all of a sudden we put the hospitals out of business because we've reduced the number of people smoking.
Right.
They seem to be doing a land office business, right? Unfortunately, I mean, but people get sick, you know.
Yeah.
But the idea was that if you stopped smoking, no one would get sick.
And people are coming in at the same level of illnesses that they had before, right? With heart disease or...
Well, no, I mean, heart disease is a disease that has really, well, certainly deaths from heart disease has been reduced for smokers and non-smokers tremendously over the last 30 or 40 years. And I don't know what the rates of cancer are. They're pretty high, I guess. I mean, it certainly seems like a lot of people get cancer. Do you know this guy, Michael Pollan? No, he's written a book about... he had a book on, he's written on food a lot. He's a very well-known food writer in terms of, and just looking at how tobacco is treated, because, for example, he's written a book recently on psychedelics, on the possibility that psychedelics could be, it's a big compendium, and it's a...
Poland?
Pollan. His last name is Pollan.
Okay.
And he's probably considered the most well-known writer on food, and I don't mean cooking and gourmet type of food, but how food has changed over many, many years and that sort of thing. And they've made feature films of his movies. He's kind of a celebrity, as you might say.
Seems like I've heard the name. So what was your point?
Well, my point was he's all of a sudden about a year ago he came out with a book on psychedelics, where gives a long history of psychedelics and how the possibility of psychedelics could be used, and it's a real compendium on the whole issue. It looks very I mean, to me it's. I mean, I don't know how interesting it would be to me. I don't like Michael Pollan very much, but one thing I noticed, I looked in the index, which is really incredible. There's no listing for tobacco. He doesn't even discuss tobacco in it. And here we have tobacco, which of course in South America is considered the most, I mean, even today in South America when people go down to try to use ayahuasca, the shamans and everybody refers to tobacco as the master plant. And Michael Pollan didn't even see fit to include it in the index.
Well, you certainly couldn't describe it as a psychedelic.
No, by no means. But it does hold a very, very high. It's very held in high regard in all shamanic religions, and certainly American Indians. And for him to not include it is really a slight to tobacco, and it's an omission that's not a good thing.
Ayahuasca isn't that a tea that they use here in America for some religious sects?
Well, ayahuasca is a powerful combination of roots and that sort of thing that is from the Amazon and is a very, very powerful hallucinogen. And there is a sect of people here in the United States who I think are Brazilian primarily, and who use it sacramentally, and they brought their case to the United States Supreme Court because they were being forbidden to use it. It's a very powerful hallucinogen. I mean,
yeah. Well, it's an interesting idea that people can get legal permission to use psychedelics if they appeal to their religion.
I mean,
it's an interesting concept.
Well, it's under the First Amendment.
I know, but I mean,
I mean, people, the government is, we have a constitution that says you have First Amendment rights to the reasonable practice of your religion, and the government cannot, um, the government cannot circumscribe them unreasonably. So it goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has to decide, well, is this reasonable or unreasonable?
I know, but I'm just saying. The consensus is that psychedelics are illegal because they are not good for people's mental health, right?
Well,
So
I
I'm
mean,
just saying-
I guess there's a consensus, but the consensus is not. I mean, there are a lot of people who feel that psychedelics could be of benefit.
I mean, say if some group went to the Supreme Court and said, well, we need to use LSD in our rituals,
Right, right.
I see no difference, really.
Well, I mean, there may not be a difference, but that group would have to demonstrate to the Supreme Court that they can't just walk in there willy-nilly and say, this is what we're doing. They would have to demonstrate some kind of convincing evidence that it is indeed part of a religious sacrament. I mean, I remember when Cambridge first passed its tobacco regulation, oh gosh, I don't know, probably around 1990, 1990. Wait, it was before that. There was a fellow who was studying at the Divinity School, and he was studying Native American religion, and he said that in Cambridge that the law was too broad because it would forbid the use of tobacco in churches, and he was going to bring a lawsuit against the city of Cambridge because he said, well, tobacco used as a religious sacrament could not be, the city did not have the authority to forbid that.
Yeah, but who uses tobacco in churches?
Well, a lot of American Indians use tobacco religiously, and they could have a service or a ceremony in a church here in Cambridge, and it would be completely legal.
Well, I know you've often talked about how tobacco was important for Native American rituals and like negotiations, right? Diplomacy, those kind of things.
Yes.
Am I correct?
The peace pipe, yes.
The famous peace pipe.
The famous peace pipe, yes. Yeah. No American Indian would go into a council without the peace pipe because at least they felt it helped them see through complex matters, and it made them less passionate, so they could discuss things and I think that's one of the reasons that our government is not working as well as it once did, is because in Congress nobody smokes now. They can't smoke, so you don't have these smoke-filled back rooms where people kind of enjoyed this kind of benefit that tobacco. It's all a bunch of uptight non-smokers, and I mean that's what Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he was governor of California, he had a tent built outside the Capitol where he would negotiate with different people over cigars, and he felt that helped him to. Just as the American Indian helped them to just cool out a bit and see through complex matters and be less passionate.
Well, this gets into nicotine, which you and I were talking about before the show. Nicotine is not considered a stimulant, is it?
There's a difference between pharmaceuticals and naturally occurring substances, which in this case people like to call nicotine a drug. I don't really like to call it a drug, but it's not as easy to compartmentalize. Nicotine, for example, helps you stay. It can calm you down and increase your brain activity at the same time, which I don't think there is any pharmaceutical that can do that.
Well, that's what I mean. Like you say, smoking has a relaxing effect. So
right, but it also makes you think more clearly, and it also is. They have done scientific tests on it. Increases brain activity. I don't think there's any pharmaceutical that will do that. They will either calm you down, but at the same time, they're not going to help you.
Probably not.
let's say, pass a test or make difficult decisions. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that Churchill was so much better able to manage Britain in the Second World War than Hitler was Germany, because Hitler was a non-smoker and Winston Churchill had the benefit of cigars, and he could handle a lot of stress that I don't think Adolf Hitler could handle well.
Probably not. That's yeah. Hitler was very prudish about.
Well, he was a big anti-smoker.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I sent you an email. Do you remember what the email said, off the top of your head, without consulting your smartphone? Because that's the subject we wanted to discuss tonight.
Well, I just read it very briefly before I refresh my memory.
Well, no, you tell me what you remember of it.
It was something about nicotine and nicotine not being addictive.
Well, it was a public comment to the FDA, because the FDA is talking about banning flavored electronic cigarettes, and electronic cigarettes deliver nicotine and water vapor.
Yes. But, well, I think this email said that nicotine has not been proven to be addictive.
Yes, that would be considered a very controversial statement, because it is widely thought that nicotine is addictive.
Well, it's interesting because I noticed that if I choose to stop smoking for a while, I seem to be able to do it.
Yes, and you don't notice any withdrawal symptoms.
No, I don't know withdrawal symptoms. Although I will admit that I will tend to drift back to it.
Yes.
Like just for example, I've given up smoking for the last couple of weeks, and recently I've started up again. Now I don't know if that makes it addictive.
Well, I mean, the word addictive is a funny word, because there really is no universally agreed upon definition. I mean, if you go to find a definition of the word addictive, it's like the word drug. I mean, drug is, according to the best definition I saw, is any substance which administered to a rat produces 2 scientific papers. I mean, there's no real. I mean, people talk about addiction, but well, of course, if you say, I don't know, it's some addiction and habit. Ovid, Ovid, the Roman poet.
Yes.
He said there is nothing as powerful or as strong as habit. Habit is very strong.
Well, for example, do you consider yourself addicted to coffee?
To coffee?
Because I do. Well, in other words, I have to have my coffee in the morning.
Right. Otherwise, you'd go berserk.
And that's not to say that I couldn't make myself stop if I absolutely had to.
Yes.
But there's nothing's going to get me to stop it. In other words, right?
Yes.
But why would I want to stop it?
Right.
I guess you can make that point. To me, an addicted means that you have no power. You cannot stop it.
Well, but obviously you can stop it, because you said if you had to stop it, you could stop it.
Well, yeah, I guess so.
I think really, addiction's not a clear word. I think the difference is that really what people mean, because I think anything can become addictive. Running can become addictive. The internet is addictive. Coffee is addictive. Tea is addictive. Some scientists... Alcohol. Some scientists say fatty foods are addictive. Some scientists say sugar is addictive. But I guess really what people are talking about is how addictive. So that's a better thing. So if I, for the sake of argument, say nicotine is addictive, how addictive is it? Well, if you stop smoking, as millions upon millions upon millions of Americans have, entirely on their own without the help of any pharmaceuticals or treatment programs, the only discomfort they suffer is a few days of irritability and difficulty concentrating. and they kind of maybe crave smoking, but that's very, very different than, for example, if you stop alcohol, if you're very, very addicted to alcohol, and you can have seizures and die. I mean, there's a very big difference there. Or if you are a drug addict,
or heroin or something, right? I mean,
right.
you have to take methadone.
Well, you don't have to take methadone. People stop all of those drugs without any, but they suffer really bad. I mean, they get sick and they vomit and they have hallucinations and they sweat.
Maybe the best definition is that it's a habit that it's a habit that's hard to break.
Well, what habit isn't hard to break? See, that's where the definition. Well, the point is that they're making a big deal. The FDA right now is making a big deal about eliminating flavored cigarettes, and they say that
and menthol cigarettes too, right?
Right, but the menthol is coming later. They want to do the menthol coming later.
No. I'm wondering why do they focus on menthol cigarettes as opposed to other cigarettes? What's that all about?
Well, the point is they really want to ban all cigarettes, and they want to do it incrementally, and but they can talk about menthol cigarettes because, according to anti-smokers, menthol cigarettes make it easier to start smoking because they're milder. So
pleasant flavor.
And a pleasant flavor, and
I see, yeah.
I guess, yeah, but I mean, but that's kind of absurd because right now the teenage smoking rate is the lowest it's ever been. So obviously teenagers are not succumbing to tobacco addiction from taking menthol cigarettes.
And then also, I guess recently the Trump administration is being criticized by conservatives because they're trying to crack down on vaping.
Yeah.
Or something, which they don't understand why they're doing that, right? Because it's.
Well, I mean, there is one thing about the Trump administration has always been that they would not overregulate business. Now, of course, overregulate or underregulate, those are subjective opinions. Unfortunately, Trump's pick for the director of the FDA is getting bent out of shape because he says that there's an enormous number of young people vaping. So my point in that email is essentially vaping isn't harmful for anyone. Teenagers are adults because nicotine itself is not harmful and it's not addictive in the sense that alcohol or hard drugs are addictive because you can stop it very easily and then suffer no ill consequences. I mean, I don't see any problem with teenagers vaping.
Yeah.
Frankly.
Well, but is he winning support for this initiative?
Among all anti-smokers, yes.
Yeah, but
Gottlieb.
yeah.
Scott Gottlieb.
Well, I guess the thing is, most people would probably just go along with it, right? Because they think that all forms of anything connected with smoking, whether even if it's vaping, is considered to be bad, right?
Yes,
so the
except
general consensus would probably tend to go along with.
Yeah,
with him.
That's right. I would think so. But I was interested to see that there are Republicans in Congress who are perturbed at Gottlieb. I was afraid there might be no pushback.
What are the rules about vaping for teenagers? Is there an age limit or?
I think, for example, I think in the state of Massachusetts you have to be 21 to buy a vaping product, and according to the government, a lot of teenagers are vaping. I don't see a problem with that, frankly. I don't think anybody's going to get sick from vaping. I don't think nicotine's harmful. I don't think it's addictive in the sense of heroin or alcohol. And I think, yes, so I think this is overreach, regulatory overreach.
You'd think they'd be happy that people were doing that instead of cigarettes, right? I mean,
well, that's what you would think on the part of a lot of anti-smokers, and it's kind of, I think that they think, I don't know, that somehow vaping will make the idea of smoking kind of less less stigmatized, and and therefore they want to wipe out vaping.
Oh, interesting. I've only tried it, I think, once or twice. It didn't seem to.
I'm not really interested in vaping,
Yeah.
but so that's why I sent you an email, and I hope that you will copy and paste what I wrote and plug it into the FDA website, which is taking public comments.
Okay.
Or write your own thing. But you don't. The reason I don't ask people to write their own thing is because people think about writing their own thing, and then it takes them 8 weeks to do it, and then the public comment is closed.
Okay, I'll have a look.
I mean, it took me a long time just to get myself to send in my comment. Listen, thank you for watching the show. And David, thank you for being on.
Nice
and
to be
this
with
was
you, as always.
another happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.